Just so everybody knows that this has been a very busy time in the legislature. So some of the legislators are have a couple other things that are going on. We will wait about 5 or 10 minutes before we gavel the committee to order.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Sorry I'm a few minutes late.
I just want that for the record.
Then I'm sorry.
No.
All right. I think probably best we're going to jump around a bit rather than go in numerical order. So how about we do 1080 first? First, yeah, Senator Avard moves that we go into executive session.
I second.
Seconded by Senator Sherman. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, good. All right. Let's take up 1080 and let's get a motion on the floor first.
Move interim study.
Second.
Okay, so it's been moved, it's been seconded. I'm sure there's some discussion, so I'll recognize Senator Sherman first, to be followed probably by Senator Avard.
Yeah, this is, we heard testimony that this was similar to Massachusetts, which it's not. It is far broader than Massachusetts. And, you know, I think we all believe, in fact, it's in healthcare and medicine, it is part of our AMA mission statement, part of what we do, that we are allowed to follow our conscience. So on the one hand, I would say it's not necessary. And if there are people who feel that it is necessary, this version is far too broad. And it may have impacts on the actual functioning, especially in healthcare arenas where there is limited access. It could have dire circumstances, and we heard that in testimony, in areas where there is limited access to healthcare. So that's why I'm making an interim study rather than ITL, because I do believe that if we're thinking of moving in this direction, we at least need to have more work done on the bill. But I would reiterate that whether you're a nurse or a doctor or a pharmacist, all of those professions do have a right of conscience built into their, into the mantra and actually the writing of each of those associations. So I don't believe it's necessary, but if it is necessary, it is definitely not ready for prime time, and an interim study would be the appropriate next step. Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? Senator Avard, Senator Gray, Senator Avard.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to support the bill. I think we should side on the right of individuals and their conscience, and I just feel it's just one more right that I feel like we're taking away from individuals, and so I'll be in support of this bill. I really don't have anything further to say other than that. I really think that we're seeing a lot of our rights just in jeopardy, and one of a right of conscience, I think is quintessential to liberty, and I think this bill would reflect that. So with that, I'll be voting for passage of it, so, and against the interim study.
Senator Whitley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm also going to support the interim study. I think, there are some unintended consequences that we want to explore, particularly because this is so broad. I mean, I think if you're looking compared to other states, the breadth of this bill is pretty stunning. So, I think not only are we talking about healthcare settings, but we're also talking about all types of places where all types of places where patients seek treatment, including pharmacies. So we never want to be in a situation where someone doesn't have access, for example, to contraception. So I think it's really broad. The other thing I want to make sure, when we're thinking about, we've talked a lot about in the context of this bill, the balancing of interests. And certainly, we don't want to elevate one right over another. And the balancing is really important. And I think the balance already exists in law. We have federal employment law that already prohibits employment discrimination based on religion, ensuring that employees' religious beliefs are balanced with an employer's duty to provide health care. So I think there's already balance in the law, and so I think going any further, it's just not the time to do that. Thank you.
Senator Gray? Good. All right, I would just say I'm going to support interim study 2. I thought the memo the committee received from Marissa Chase and Holly Haynes was spot on. I would urge the sponsors of the bill to come back and work with people like Holly and Marissa in the future if they want to introduce legislation, because I think that they pointed out some of the problems that need to be resolved before we would have this in state law. It is very broad. It applies to every person, either in a physician's office or even a clerk dispensing contraception. There are no exceptions for emergencies. Emergencies, that's a huge thing. And then lastly, I think we do have federal law that protects right of conscience now. So whatever might be proposed in the future in New Hampshire should be, I think, consistent with federal law. So with that, that's where I'm at too. So is there any further discussion? Okay, seeing none, all in favor of the motion of interim study, say aye. Aye. And opposed?
No.
So I have 4-1. Okay, all right, I'll take this one out. All right, so move on to 12-10. All right, so is there a motion on 12?
Ought to pass?
All right, Senator Avard moves ought to pass. I'll let you speak to your motion of ought to pass.
Again, this is another one of those bills where I think people should have a right to basically have a right over their own body, whether they be vaccinated or not. Just trying to find my notes on it. Give me a second. I think one of the things that's troubling me these days, and people I don't think are asking the right questions, and whether it's a vaccine mandate or one of my biggest concerns is the fact that we made some decisions a few years back, and as a result of these decisions, by receiving a lot of federal money, the feds are basically dictating to us as to how we make policy. Well, if you resist on any level, they're holding hostage CMS or other organizations with 35 million here or 50 million there or whatever amount of money. But what I see is that we're fighting over these issues, and there's a dollar amount behind them. So if we want to have autonomy, if we want to have autonomy over our own bodies, or whether it's, there's a host of bills that are coming out with vaccines and masks and all that, but there's also a lot of federal money that's tied to that. And I just feel as though that the feds are mandating and dictating to us as to how we choose to legislate. And it's concerning to me. So I know that I'm swimming upstream here, but I believe that we need to, resist at some level, and if not today, in the future, as to our rights of the citizens to live free in New Hampshire, to make choices over their own bodies with regards to their vaccines or whatever. I'm overwhelmed by it. I'm overwhelmed by the amount of money that purchased some of our liberties away from us. We've agreed to it, and this is an attempt for people to usurp their rights back. So that's how I feel, Mr. Chairman. I just this with a host of other bills that are out there, and they're all starting to blend. And I feel people want to be heard. They want to have a right over their own bodies. They want to have to. They want to have to work without having to be told, how to, whether it need to be vaccine or again, there's a host of issues out here. But I think there's a lot of federal money that is dictating to us as to how we make policy, and I'm a little frustrated by that. So I'm voting not to pass.
Okay. Someone else want to speak on the ought to pass motion? Senator Sherman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I clearly, and as loud as possible, I oppose this motion of ought to pass. What about the freedom of businesses to set their own policies? If we learned nothing else from COVID, we learned how devastating a simple virus can be. We learned that it can shut down our schools, our businesses, our very way of life, and yet we have the capacity to stop that, and that's what we did. We did that through vaccination. We did that through other things that protected not just the people who are vaccinated, but the people around them, and especially those who couldn't be vaccinated. And that's real freedom. To talk about liberty and freedom is very selective. Talk about personal freedom, but how about personal responsibility, which is what I've always thought was the major value system of the state of New Hampshire. We don't have the freedom to get behind the wheel of a car when we're drunk. We don't. We've decided that that personal freedom is trumped by personal responsibility and our commitment to communities and safety. You talk about the people have spoken to protect their personal freedom. Well, the people have spoken. The people have spoken loud and clear that this is not a good idea. What do we have? We have the New Hampshire College and University Council. We have New Futures. We have New Hampshire Municipal Association. We have the BIA. We have Bi-State Primary Care. We have, this isn't some conspiracy. These are people who care about their community and about each other, and they recognize that we learned from COVID how big a threat it is to us, our society, our very way of life, if we don't hold on to the ability to protect ourselves. We have always believed that private businesses should be able to do what they need to do to stay in business. We have never embraced the idea that the government knows better than our private businesses. And we have always turned to experts in healthcare and medicine for evidence-based clinical best practice, how we protect our school children, our nursing homes, our most vulnerable. This bill flies in face of that. This bill allows an individual to put others at risk, says the state knows better than our private businesses, and I hope you'll join me in opposing it. I think it's really the wrong direction for so many reasons, and especially just keeping New Hampshire safe. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Whitley?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I also can't support the ought to pass motion. I think this was one of the most, I think we saw advocates come out on this and provide pretty compelling testimony about how detrimental this could be on human cost in terms of human health, the money at risk, and then the impact on our business. In terms of the human cost, we vaccine science, this, it applies to more than just COVID. I think that we need to be clear. A lot of the legislation we are seeing is so reactive to COVID, but we have to remember that vaccine has saved lives, and they're so important for, for human health and for public health. So there's a human cost if we pass this bill for the health and safety of Granite Staters. There's also a lot of money at stake. We heard testimony from the New Hampshire Hospital Association that because this bill directly conflicts with CMS requirements, we could lose funding, not in the millions, but we could lose billions of funding. And that would just, halt our economy. And I think that would be wildly irresponsible. Again, we're balancing interests here. We cannot elevate one particular view over our economic future, over human health. And lastly, we heard loud and clear that this was not a business-friendly bill from the BIA and from the brilliant employment lawyer, Andrea Chatfield, who made it very clear that this language takes away employers' rights to investigate an exemption request, and then it leaves our employers vulnerable to wrongful termination litigation and fines from the Department of Labor. So because of the human costs, because of the money that's at stake that we've been losing, and this is not business friendly, I can't support the ought to pass motion. Thank you.
I may follow up.
Okay.
I think my point has been proven. That there's billions of dollars, yeah. And, I look back and as a kid, I liked cartoons. I liked watching Bugs Bunny. And I remember a cartoon where Bugs Bunny was talking about the American Indians and how that they sold Manhattan for some beads and a song. I think the people that are out there that are trying to preserve their independence, you need to take a look at this. Come back maybe even in another year, but you need to realize that a lot of our liberties are being purchased Your right to refuse a vaccine is not equivalent to being a drunk driver. What was very good in the beginning could also be used in ways that maybe aren't so good for our country. Yeah, there are many people that are very, very strident about the vaccines. But there are very people that have the same concerns on the opposite side of the issue, and they're screaming. It's the people. It's not the bureaucrats. The people are saying, I want to be heard. This bill also talks about religious liberty. It talks about religious liberty. And I hear from my constituents that their religious liberties are being violated and they're being poo-pooed. Well, what does your pastor say? Well, this is an inalienable right, and all we're trying to do is reaffirm what is inalienable. You know, I look back at history and I think about Babylon. Crying out loud. What happened? Babylon, that great, great city. It was taken over in one night because they slipped under the door. They thought they were invincible. When the federal government mandates to us our local states' policies, that's a problem. It's been purchased. We've agreed to it years ago. This is an attempt, and the people from the House sent it over, ought to pass. The House sent this over as ought to pass. That's the people. So the people said, I want this bill. Senator Whitley, I totally understand that there's billions of dollars. And I understand, Senator Sherman, that there's a medical concern. But the medical society has been wrong too in times past. And I don't even want to have to go back and forth on that. Because you're a doctor and I'm not, nor am I the son of a doctor. I just feel we're in a really conundrum at this point. So I'm going to continue to vote for this, and hopefully I'm just being a voice for the people because they want to be heard. And I support this bill.
So I'm going to recognize Senator Gray, but there hasn't been a second to the motion of ought to pass. So for purposes of being polite to Senator Avard and making sure he gets the opportunity to have an actual vote, I will second the motion of ought to pass, and then I'll speak after Senator Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As we can see here in this committee, there is a lot of emotion on both sides of this issue. I don't support the ought to pass motion mainly because of line 19 and 20 of the bill, where it says that a request has to be approved by the employer. And then goes on to talk about the negotiation that would happen. But that wording in there that says that it shall be approved, or to the effect that it shall be approved, is problematic for the businesses, problematic for others. I spoke with the prime sponsor of the bill, trying to reach a compromise and do something with it. It was apparent that they were not interested in that. I've spoken to the other side to see, and they are not interested in moving. And so I can't support the underlying bill. I could support doing something, but there's not an atmosphere to do that right now in this legislature. So with that, I will not be seconding, I will not be supporting ought to pass.
Okay, so let me just say a couple of things. The federal money is Medicaid and Medicare. I think most of us would agree that senior citizens and their health care is important in New Hampshire. That's the vast majority of the $2.3 billion that just the hospitals alone would stand to lose. Medicaid, I don't think anybody in this room's worked harder than I have for Medicaid expansion, and there are a lot of people in this room that have worked real hard for it. I think it has changed the trajectory of people's lives in a positive way. So there are some that are saying the threat's not real. The threat's already starting to be enforced in Kansas, and that should be a concern. I don't support that people get fired for, a mandatory vaccine. I never have. I spent a lot of time talking to business leaders, hospital CEOs to try to have reasonable accommodations based on medical and religious exemptions. That's the law of, and it's been the practice for a long time. And I think that our friends in the medical community are doing the darndest they can to manage the need for good health care through the pandemic in New Hampshire. I just came from CMC this morning and had to get a MRI done, and you know what? It was it's important to know how hard these folks have worked in very trying circumstances, from the radiologist who is a fellow grid finisher. It was an amazing thing. There are only about 120 of us, and I have to give her a shout out. And, all up and down the line. And I know that, there are healthcare employees that don't agree with the vaccine mandate. And, I would hope that employers in New Hampshire, I'm looking around the room, so please take this seriously, continue to try your darndest to honor those requests for religious and medical exceptions that are legitimate. So we find ourselves in a, situation that, we find ourselves in a lot, and that is compromise. And I think for those who have paid attention to, the workload of this committee on these issues related to the pandemic, this committee has done a good job of finding compromise on a lot of different initiatives. We haven't always compromised, but we've actually done a pretty good job. We're going to get to a couple of bills later on where I think that hopefully will be a sign that compromise still is possible. But I want to say to the sponsor of the bill, who was a good friend, that last year on his bill, House Bill 220, we found a way to thread the needle. And I stayed up late at night and gotten up early in the morning, and for many a day, and this bill, I haven't been able to find a way to compromise. There was the thought of exempting anyone that deals with CMS, so exempting hospitals, doctors, etc. And then you're just applying the right of conscience or a mandatory religious or medical exemption to every other employer in the state. And then we had the testimony, I think, that Senator Whitley referred to, and I'd urge anybody, it's Cam can get it to you if you haven't seen it, of how difficult it would be, according to Ms. Chatfield and the HR State Council of New Hampshire, to reach reasonable accommodation. And what the sponsor of the bill proposed to me still had the problems that the bill had. It applies to every vaccine. You shall grant a religious or medical exception. It affects all other employers in the state of New Hampshire. And I think, as you can see from Ms. Chatfield's testimony, it's going to lead to litigation. And I think that's why there was, unlike House Bill 220 from last year, just an inability to get to something workable. As I said in the last bill, the sponsors should go back and try to work with the folks on the other side on this issue and try to reach that sweet spot of compromise. I don't know what it is today. I just know this bill isn't it. We cannot put the health care of everybody over 65 in this state and everybody on Medicaid at risk. We can't put at risk the men and women who deliver that health care. And unfortunately, that's what's at risk here. So I can't vote for ought to pass. I'm very sorry. So with that, let's take the vote on the motion of ought to pass. All in favor, say aye.
You didn't get a second, so.
No, I second it
Oh, okay.
before I recognized you.
All right.
Yeah. Jim is the parliamentarian in the group here. All right, so all in favor of aye, say yes.
You're all welcome to join me. Aye.
And opposed, say no.
No.
No. All right, so it is 1-4. Is there a motion of interim study? All right, I'll move it.
I'll second.
I'm ready to go. All right. I don't think we need any more debate. We had our debate already. Is that all right with everybody? All right, so all in favor of interim study, say aye.
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 And opposed? Okay, I'll take this one out too. Okey doke. Let's go to 1455. There should be an amendment.
Move on to that.
All right, it's been moved on to pass. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Senator Gray. All right. So the amendment that I have written, I worked with folks on to make sure that the Kansas situation, where they're already starting to be sanctioned, would not happen here. The amendment is the addition of paragraph 3, lines 23 through 26. And it basically says the section shall not apply to any healthcare provider under the authority of the Department of Health and Human Services. So that exempts anybody that is subject to CMS regulations,
Yes.
but then allows we would not cooperate with enforcing any other vaccine mandate.
For the
Yes.
record, the amendment number is 1449F.
Yes. Okay. Any discussion? Okey doke. All in favor of the amendment, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? All right, we have 5-0 vote on the amendment. Senator Avard moves ought to pass as amended. Is there discussion? Seeing yes.
Yes, thank you.
Senator Whitley.
So I think that I can't support the ought to pass motion. I appreciate the amendment. I think it does make it better. But look, again, we continue to see bills that are reactive to our current situation. And I think it's unwise to legislate in that reactive position when, again, we know, putting aside COVID, we know how effective vaccines are. Also, I just don't think that we would want to interfere with the ability of private employers to make decisions about the health and safety protocols that are appropriate for their businesses. And I think bills like this sow distrust between the state and the federal government. And I don't think that's productive. I don't think that keeps the health and wellness of Granite Staters safe. So I think this is not something I can support and look, there are so many tough issues that we have to deal with in the legislature. It is, I have to express frustration that we have spent so much time on this reactive, politically motivated legislation when there are people in need, there are children at risk, there are families who can't pay their bills. I wish that we were focusing all our time on that rather than this reactive, politically driven legislation. So I can't support it. Thank you.
Senator Sherman.
I agree. I can't support it either. We have seen so much rejection of the history of vaccine. We've seen so much rejection of the clinical efficacy of vaccines. We've seen embracing conspiracy theories. We've seen, and the cost of all of this is to our businesses, which we're now trying to micromanage. The cost is the faith that we have in our providers and our professions, and studies that have shown, studies and outcomes that have shown the efficacy of vaccines through history. And now we're passing bills that don't make us healthier, fundamentally. These put people at risk. It's taking us off track. It's taking us as a state, as Senator Whitley said, it's distracting us from the real work we need to be doing, and I can't support it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Avard.
Real quickly, I just, for the record, I'm not an anti-vaxxer. I help people in Nashua, seniors, children's home. I've helped them get vaccines. I've utilized that when people have that option and they wanted it. So there's no conspiracy here. This is, again, just another example of people trying to express their liberty and their freedom to choose one way or another. I don't think just because you support this that you're part of some big conspiracy thing. Not everybody believes in that, but they do believe in the ability of just having choice. So for that reason, I'm supporting the bill as ought to pass. Thank you.
Anyone else? All right, I would just say that all this is it says the state or local subdivisions won't enforce a federal vaccine mandate. That's what it says. So to me, that makes sense. We've exempted anyone under the regulation of CMS, will not put at risk federal funding for Medicaid and Medicare. I think it's actually a pretty simple bill and a pretty good compromise. So unless there's anyone else, let's, I think we voted on the amendment, is that correct?
Yep.
So the motion of Senator Avard, seconded by Senator Gray, is ought to pass as amended. All right, all in favor of ought to pass as amended, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Okey doke. I'm gonna let Senator Avard take this one out. All right, 3 down, 1 to go. So let us turn to House Bill 1022. And I would entertain a motion. Senator Avard has moved ought to pass. Senator Gray seconds.
Yep.
All right. There are 2 amendments. I think the 2 amendments are 1633 and 1826. So since I have my name on both of them, let me try to explain them. 1633 would create a commission to examine the efficacy and make recommendations as to whether a standing order should be created for ivermectin. Right now, there are 3 standing orders. Standing order, basically, as I understand it, it allows somebody to go to their pharmacy and have access to what would normally be a prescribed drug. I think I've explained that pretty correctly. We have 3 standing orders for different pharmacological products in New Hampshire right now. Oral contraception, which is the result of a commission study and then legislation like this. Narcan, which came out of a commission that I chaired a long time ago. I think you were on it with Speaker Hinch. He was the co-chair and that recommended Narcan. And then the third standing orders for smoking cessation, and that's been around for some time, so I am not aware of the history of that. So I do think that a commission makes sense. However, I also think that given the testimony that we receive from individuals around the state, including some medical professionals, Dr. York, for instance, I thought it would be appropriate to blend a commission and a standing order. So if you look at Amendment 1826, it makes an amendment to Section 1 of the bill. Doesn't change anything else except Section 1 and the dates. We'll get to that in a second. So if you look on lines 14 through 17, it allows a standing order for anybody that is 18 years and older, that we had testimony that the standing order proposed in the original legislation would have been wide open. And it restricts a standing order for anybody who is pregnant. Now, let's also remember, as we are talking about either somebody who's under 18 or pregnant, with the bill that's on the calendar this week, 1466, we create new opportunities, for lack of a better word, for prescribers to be able to prescribe ivermectin for COVID use. So that option also exists. What I thought was appropriate, and I hope that people will here back this up, is what happens in the back of the bill on lines 32 and on. The standing order gets sunset on July 1 of 2024, and the commission gets sunset after their final report on December 31st of 2023. So this is a temporary, my proposal is a temporary standing order to be followed up with a commission to make a recommendation on whether it should be extended. I think it's a reasonable compromise. If what I'd prefer is that we take up amendment 1826, because that's the blended amendment that has the 2-year standing order with a commission in it. And if that fails, then I would hope somebody would introduce 1633, which is a commission only.
Mr. Chair.
Second.
Mr. Chair,
Senator Sherman.
we would like to caucus.
Okay. We'll be in recess for 5 minutes. All right. That means we will be back at 11:22. Okay. We're back in executive session. So I'm going to recognize Senator Sherman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have these two amendments, one of which I would support because it supports the current process for approval of standing orders. And the second one I can't support because, actually for many reasons, but it actually goes ahead with putting on a standing order on a drug without even going through the commission process. So let's think about this. We would be putting a standing order available for a drug that is used for parasites in diarrhea, which, by the way, is my specialty. And I've written for it many times. We have two double-blind, controlled, excellent, large population studies showing zero effectiveness for ivermectin in COVID. Brand new. There is no FDA approval for ivermectin in COVID. We have at least one and multiple in production very effective drugs for early COVID that have been shown in good clinical studies to decrease both the symptoms and the risks of COVID, the risks of hospitalization, the risks of ending up in ICU with a ventilator. And we have a tried and true process to look at drugs that the people want us to look at because they believe they work. We're discounting all of that. From a purely healthcare medical background, I can't think of a word that would capture how irresponsible this step would be for any legislative body to do this. Every drug I've ever used has potential side effects. Why not make all drugs available with a standing order? I can't imagine the quandary Dr. Ballard's going to be in with this one. We are putting his professional liability at risk with a drug that has no proven efficacy, no FDA approval, risk of side effects, and anybody can walk in if they're over 18 and get it. We have never, ever done this before as a state, and we shouldn't go down this incredibly dangerous path now. What's it going to be next? What, quote, safe drug? You know, suppose I have atrial fibrillation, and I think digoxin would help me. Why should I have to go to a doctor for that? Why can't I just go get it? We are dismissing everything we stand for. When we do this, we know it's not effective. We know it has side effects. And we know, most of all, and most importantly, there is a process for approval for drugs if we really want to go down this road. And I will vote for the one that goes down the road of our standard process. For me, voting for this is malpractice. And I can't believe we're actually doing this. I'm shocked. We are putting the health of the people of New Hampshire at risk when we know better. And we know we have a process to evaluate drugs that we want to make standing orders for. We know better. For whatever reason, and I'm not going to cast aspersions, if we vote for this amendment, we are going against the science, we're going against the clinical medicine, we're going against the standard practice of medicine, we are going against good process, and it's just plain wrong. And people can get hurt by it. Let's do the right thing. Let's follow the process. Let's make sure it's safe. And let's vote down this amendment so we can go on to the process and actually vote through an amendment that we can all support, 5-0. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Whitley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree with my colleague. I cannot support 1826, but I could support 1633. As our chair mentioned, we only have standing orders for oral contraceptions, Narcan, smoking cessation, all of which went through, I believe, the commission process. Now, I just want to mention a few things about those existing standing orders. Smoking cessation, we added that. It extends lives, keeps people alive, recommended by the medical community. Narcan saves lives from people. We have an epidemic in New Hampshire. People were dying. Narcan saves lives, fully supported by the medical community. Oral contraception. As a woman, this is the most freeing drug available. We have control over our reproductive futures. Oral contraception, that's why I'm sitting in this chair right now. I had full control. My mother had full control over her future, fully supported by the medical community, yet we still had to go through the commission process. Ivermectin, not supported by the medical community for treatment for COVID. And that's because they are grounded in science and evidence. What are we doing here? What are we doing here? Again, there are so many people in New Hampshire suffering right now. They can't pay their bills. There are children that are at risk. We are doing our level best in a bipartisan way to support children and families. This is a distraction. It's a political distraction. So we are now going to put in place a standing order against the recommendations of the medical community without a commission. What are we doing here? So again, I would ask the committee, let's go ahead and go through the process that every other life-saving, life-changing medication went through to become a standing order. Let's do the same thing for this drug. Let's listen to our medical providers. How are we in a place where we are ignoring our medical providers? Ivermectin is a drug. It's available. There are side effects. It can be safe. There is no valid study that shows it is a treatment for COVID. What are we doing here, folks? So let's vote down 1826. Let's do this commission. Thank you.
Okay, well, let me try to respond to it, not being a doctor, but having the ability to read the testimony that we received from Dr. Salerni, who is a licensed neurosurgeon in the state of New Hampshire. And I think it's pretty instructive to look at his testimony when we hear claims that we just heard. Here is a physician, and we heard testimony, live testimony from Dr. York, and I suspect that if I go back through the written record, I know I've gotten phone calls from doctors around the country urging that we consider this legislation. I think his testimony is rather instructive. So on the 5th page of his testimony, he says, at this point, I had already read close to 100 articles, most of which were randomized and controls that showed that ivermectin, usually along with other combination of drugs, was effective at limiting the severity of disease in those with COVID-19. So, you know, when we talk about the science of it, obviously it's an evolving field as it looks at ivermectin. We've had a huge amount of individual testimony that talks about ivermectin having helped people with COVID. It's been part of the landscape, I believe, since the early 1990s, so for a long period of time, safe, except not recommended for a woman that's pregnant. But that's even somewhat inconclusive according to what I've read in Lancet, the British medical journal. I think a temporary standing order for ivermectin is a reasonable compromise, and I would hope that we can support it. Senator Gray.
Part of the testimony from the senators has been, go to the medical community. Interesting. Is aspirin good for you? Is aspirin not good for you? And a lot of testimony with low-dose aspirin does this, low-dose aspirin. And now, again, in the news in the last couple of days, we're finding, well, maybe we didn't get it right. I go, because I have high blood pressure, I go to the drugstore and I order certain medications to treat my symptoms. Well, doctor says, well, you have to be careful because of this, that, and the other thing. The same things that he was telling me a couple of years before is the thing I should be taking. Other painkillers, I shouldn't say, you know, like Advil and etc. I have been told once, twice, 3 times, well, this is good, this isn't good, this is good, this isn't good. Doctors don't always get it right the first time. Data is reviewed, data is reinterpreted, the studies are reviewed, the studies are reinterpreted. And whether it's a placebo effect or not, in this particular drug, there are doctors out there with the same type of degree as Senator Sherman that are saying, hey, go for it. That's the thing to do. So a 2-year study, I don't think is irresponsible. I know that reading says, well, it may drop your blood pressure, it may do this. Well, go back to those same drugs I've talked about. Going to the drugstore to treat my cold. They may not be good for me. Go to that aspirin. Well, it may be good, maybe not. If I have a headache, don't take the aspirin because you're already taking an 81 milligram aspirin and the combination of the two aren't good. I mean, thing after thing after thing, it's been good. I mean, you can go back to coffee. Coffee is good, coffee is bad, coffee is good, coffee is bad over my lifetime. So, yeah, there's differing opinions. There's differing opinions between the medical community. Thank you, sir.
Okay, limited second round. Go ahead, Senator Sherman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate both of you making such a strong argument for a commission. Senator Gray hit the nail on the head. Our evidence changes. The initial report showing ivermectin was effective actually had some fraudulent data in it, and it was retracted by the author, Dr. Hill. The doctors who you've both referenced, one is a pathologist, Dr. York, with no clinical practice experience. The other is a neurosurgeon, and I have never met a neurosurgeon who has treated parasitic disease of the colon or the small intestine. On the other hand, the New Hampshire doctors you heard from are infectious disease specialists. You've heard from pharmacists. And I actually work in the field of diarrhea. It's not usually what it's called, but that's the field. And I have prescribed ivermectin before, unlike the two doctors you've cited. You would not go to a cardiologist for expertise on your joints, right? So this is an area of expertise for me. I'm not speaking as a state senator. I'm speaking as a doctor who's a gastroenterologist, board certified and licensed. And this is a really bad idea. Let's listen to the people who know, who have spent 30 years in practice, who understand these medications, who've worked with patients, whether it's me, medical society, the hospital association, the pharmacists. And remember that even with Narcan, where we had people dying of opioid overdoses, we had a commission first to make sure it was safe. And right now what's happening is the majority leadership of the Senate, because I'm going to oppose it and I think most of us will, are saying, we don't need that. This drug is so safe, so effective in spite of evidence to the contrary, and as Senator Gray has said, by the way, these things change, that we don't need, that we can go ahead with it right now for the next 2 years, putting people of New Hampshire at risk with a drug that's off-label, not FDA approved, and has no studies, no conclusive large-scale, multi-center or double-blinded controlled studies that show its efficacy. None. Despite what the neurosurgeon says.
Well, let's not get into
I didn't bring up,
undermining the credentials.
I didn't bring up the names, Mr. Chair.
No, I did, but
Yeah. I'm not undermining the credentials. I am simply pointing out the difference in specialty. And that's important.
fair enough. Senator Whitley, last comments. No.
My colleague was so eloquent. There's nothing more I need to say.
Okey-doke. All right, any further discussion? Seeing none. All in favor of amendment, whatever it is,
Removed any amendment?
where to go?
1826.
1826, say aye.
Aye.
And opposed?
No.
All right, is there a subsequent motion?
Move on past as amended.
Second?
Yes.
All right, I think we've discussed this enough. All in favor of ought to pass as amended, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And opposed?
No.
All right, Senator Gray, you get the honors on this one. All right, anything else to come before the committee today? I think this wraps up our work. Let's thank Cam and Lucas for jobs very well done, putting up with day after day after day after day after day. So thank you both very much, and thank you. Moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
And opposed, none. Okay, adjourned. See you all.